put about 10 hours into Crimson Oath, the new indie Souls-like from Parry Frame Studio, and I'm here to tell you whether or not it's worth your time. Crimson Oath is an indie Souls-like game created by Parry Frame Studio that is based out of China. Now, I've read that this is a 3-man team, but I'm unable to confirm that online anywhere. In this game, you play as Guts from Berserk, as noted by the skin name. Now, if that feels a little bit too on the nose, then just kind of bear with me. We're going to get into that later on. Now, let's talk about level design first. Now, bear in mind, level design is not really the main thing I go for in Souls-like games, so take that with a grain of salt. The levels in this game consist of your typical Souls-like theme. You've got your Dark Cathedral starting area, you've got your puzzling fortress zone, you've got a refreshingly bright kind of beach zone, you've got your volcano zone, and then of course your snow-capped mountains just to top it off. The only thing missing from the level design is a poison swamp and a woman that's not wearing shoes. You do have a main city area, but I'm not sure if it was supposed to be like a main hub area, because when I got there, I talked to some people, I left, and I never came back. So the world has some interconnectivity, but not like Dark Souls 1 per se, as you do travel from zone to zone via a portal at the end once you finish the zone that you're currently in. But the zones are interconnected to themselves. You've got your shortcuts back to the bonfire, you've got your ladders and your elevators and things that you weren't able to access from one side. Now, there's always a lot of discourse online on what constitutes a Souls-like versus not a Souls-like, and people love to argue about that online. The most recent feud I can think of is whether Black Myth Wukong was a Souls-like or not, and I'm pretty sure people are still arguing about that one. Now, I don't really involve myself in those arguments at all because I don't really care one way or another. However, my definition of a Souls-like is if there is the existence of a door that only opens from one side. And boy, let me tell you, Crimson Oath has a lot of these doors, specifically in the fortress zone. You'll know when you get there. The last bit of level design I want to talk about, and it's not even really a level design, but game design as a whole, is a ridiculous fall damage in this game. Now, it's been a minute since I've played this game, and so they could have fixed this by now, I'm not sure. But when I played the game, the smallest drop off of a ledge that wouldn't do anything to you in the other Souls-like games will take out half your health, and an even slightly larger drop would then kill you outright. The fall damage in this game is a bit egregious. My advice to you, don't test it. If you gotta walk around a little slope, just do it. You'll save yourself a headache in the long run. So now let's talk about the systems in the game. In Crimson Oath, you level up by putting souls, into 3 different stats. Health, which is obvious, loyalty, which increases your greatsword damage, and faith, which increases your longsword damage. There's only one weapon in the game, and so you'll only be upgrading these stats the entire time. Next, there are skills, which are active abilities that you can use during combat. They require energy, which is your blue bar under your red health bar. You can gain more energy by landing attacks on the bosses, as there are no potions to refill your energy. Next, there is equipment, which are passive buffs to your character that can help in combat. I pretty much equipped the first 12 I found and didn't change them at all for the rest of the playthrough. Now, let's talk about the combat. Combat is where the game is going to shine above all else. This game mixes elements from the Dark Souls trilogy, Sekiro, and Thymesia, and a little bit from Bloodborne. The combat functions like many Souls-likes. Right bumper to swing light, right trigger to swing heavy, hold right trigger to charge heavy. You also have your running and jumping attacks. The game borrows heavily from Sekiro with the parrying style of combat. Rolling is viable, however, I felt parrying was significantly more effective in boss fights. You also have a gun parry, but it doesn't quite function like it does in Bloodborne. See, an enemy or a boss is going to have an orange glow around them, signifying that they can be almost interrupted, as if you're playing World of Warcraft and not a Souls-like. Basically, when the enemy glows orange, you shoot them, and they get stunned for a second. If you're close enough, you get a little bit of time to get some more damage in. There are other ways to get around these orange glow abilities, like a sidestep, for example, that it shows you early in the game. However, I never used the other options as the gun worked every single time. Now, where we get into some of the questionable design choices like I was alluding to earlier with the Guts skin design, let's talk about some similarities with Thymesia. Now, if you played Thymesia before, you're going to know what I'm talking about. Firstly, the enemies in this game will have an orange guard bar and a red health bar, not unlike Thymesia's white health bar and green plague bar. You use the longsword attacks, right bumper, to damage the orange guard bar, and the greatsword attacks, right trigger, to damage the health bar. Like in Thymesia, how you use your saber to damage the white bar, and then you use your plague claw to damage the green plague bar. In my opinion, while the parrying reminds me more of Sekiro, visually it feels more like Thymesia. Next, the strong, elite, and boss level enemies will get a red dot on them when their health reaches 0, signifying an execution. The animations are unique from what I can tell, but the concept is borrowed straight from both Sekiro and Thymesia. Some enemies will also have red unguardable moves, like most Souls-likes nowadays. You can backstab enemies too, like Dark Souls, for good damage. There are these blue tinted attacks that are parryable, but the parry window is a bit tighter on those ones to get the really big stun that will follow. However, if you don't get this tighter parry window, but you still parry it with the normal timing, it still functions as a parry. Take a sip every time I say the word parry. Next, let's talk about the enemies and the boss. There are plenty of visually unique enemies in this game. However, many of them share the exact same movesets as enemies you've seen from earlier in the game. This isn't that big of a problem for me, but I do understand how it is for some people. The bosses in this game are mostly decent. However, it does fall victim to the Dark Souls 1 problem where some bosses become common or slightly less common enemies later in the game, which I really dislike. Some bosses are significantly more mechanically intense than others. For example, the Wolf boss has like 3 or 4 different moves, whereas Marcus, who's the 5th boss in the game, has an extreme amount of moves and combos and one-shot capabilities that it seems almost like a struggle to keep up with. I fully believe that a combination of RNG and luck is the only reason why I beat the Marcus boss, and I was playing on normal difficulty. Some bosses make it way too difficult to close the distance to keep your health damage or keep your guard damage down. The gun can help in these scenarios, however, you have a finite amount of bullets, so you really don't want to spam them in a boss fight. Clark is the main offender of this issue from my perspective. He had several ranged attacks and dashing attacks that would send him across the room, and you're likely to lose some of your guard bar progress if you don't close the gap soon enough, or use a bullet on it. Next, I want to take a moment and highlight the bosses that I really enjoyed and point out some ones that I didn't really like. If you know anything about me or this channel, you know that boss fights are my favorite thing about Souls-like games, and so I'm very opinionated when it comes to bosses. The first boss I want to highlight is Gbrink, or Jabrink, however you say that. He's the second boss in the game, and he's a really good skill check on if you're going to be able to parry in this game or not. He doesn't have too many moves, but he does have combos that are quick and sometimes long, but the timings aren't super difficult on them. And there really aren't any of the delayed swings mixed in with fast swings, so you don't have to worry about that one either. He has moves which you can stun him with the gun, as we explained earlier, that give you a good opening for some extra damage. Learning his timings and perfecting the parries on his combos really give you a good feeling when you finally take him down, and kind of gave you an idea of what the game is going to look like going forward. The next boss that I really liked was Darian. Darian was in a point of the game where I was honestly considering dropping him, having already fought Marcus in other fights that didn't really give me hope for what the rest of the game was going to entail. His moves were very learnable and really gave that sense of accomplishment when you got the timings down. When I learned which moves to parry, which moves to shoot, and which moves to dodge out of the way, and which ones that would give much more of an opening to get some hits on him, it really made the fight kind of feel like a dance, in which I really enjoyed it at the end. The next and final boss that I really enjoyed was, ironically, the final boss, Franklin. Now, I say ironically because there were discussions on the Steam forums about how Franklin was a worse boss than Marcus. However, he didn't feel unfair to me whatsoever. He had a ton of different moves to learn and master the timings of, including red unguardable attacks, gun parries, and a mix of fast-paced combos and slower heavy attacks. He also has a gun of his own. Welcome back, Glock Saint Ishin. I wasn't a fan of his attack that forced you to run out of range of him, but 2 bullets was usually enough to keep his guard damage down. He's a 2-phase fight where the second phase starts at about half health, in which his entire health bar refills. He's a really difficult fight, but I felt like he was totally fair and a really good send-off to end the game. Now, there are 2 bosses that are really disliked in this game, so let's get those out of the way. The first one is Mac, and Mac I just didn't like from a mechanical standpoint. See, Mac has 100 armor in his fight, and you have to spend a significant amount of time chipping away at his armor to get damage on him. Apparently, there are skills in equipment in the game that make this process a lot quicker. However, I didn't have any, and I really didn't feel like reverse trekking the entire game to try to find them. So I drudged away at this fight, and I eventually got the kill. It was by far the longest boss fight in this game for me. I understand and can appreciate the concept of the fight. However, I did feel like I was punished on this fight because I hadn't done enough exploring to get there, which to me just kind of feels a little meh. Next, I want to point out Niam, or Naum, the first to surrender. I'm pretty sure he's the 3rd boss in the game. So let's get back to talking about Thymesia for a second. I'm a huge fan of Thymesia. I love the game. I just 100%ed it on Steam, and I'm going to actually write a review and do a video of it following this one. And my favorite boss in Thymesia happens to be Erd. She's the penultimate boss. Niam from Crimson Oath has a move that is a straight up rip from Erd in Thymesia. The move is kind of a step, jump, throw. And I thought it looked really familiar when I was fighting him, and it took a minute for it to kind of settle in. But when it did, I found my footage of Thymesia that I recorded, went to the Erd part, and saw them, and said, yep, that's exactly what that is. So here's Niam doing his step, and here's Erd doing her step. You see how they're pretty much the same thing? That really put me off on this boss. I could totally be being dramatic here, but I would have appreciated a different and unique moveset from this boss. It also makes me wonder how many other bosses in the game might have moves that are ripped straight from other bosses from other games. Now, I really don't want to put the studio on blast by any means, but at the same time, I feel like I would be losing some journalistic integrity if I didn't point out these blatant issues. Now real quick, let's talk about the story and the music before we get to the final part of the review. The story I had a really hard time keeping up with, and that's not for lack of trying on my own part. The voice acting in this game was really rough. I've read online that it might have been AI generated. I can't confirm that anywhere, so do with that what you will. But if it was AI generated, that does make sense. And for the music itself, nothing really stood out or was memorable to me. I didn't have any moments where I thought, hey, this song sucks. This is not a good fit for this moment. There was just really nothing that stood out to me. Overall, I don't think this is a bad game in any way. I do think it relies a bit too heavily on the already established games in the genre. There are some questionable design choices as far as boss moves, mechanics, and some moves that are ripped straight from other games. But overall, I had a good time playing it for the 10 hours it took me to beat it. I would like to see this dev team create more games that have more their own style, as they clearly have the sauce for the game development. Crimson Oath is going to get a 6 out of 10 for me on the Avery scorecard. I would recommend this game to someone who enjoys the Souls-like genre and has played many of the bigger titles already and is looking for something quick, not super easy, and also pretty inexpensive. If you like this video, please consider liking, subscribing. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace!